Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm Brian Taylor. Today on the Smoky Mountain Homestead YouTube channel, we're going to be talking about why don't my fruit trees produce any fruit. There are some key facts that are very much overlooked by most of the big box stores on what trees can do well and produce here. What we want is a fruit tree that produces beautiful blooms like this cherry behind me, but still gives us a bunch of cherries too. Right now, we've got a bunch of really pretty fruit trees that last about 15 days a year of a nice bloom, and then they're not giving us anything else. So I want to help you guys avoid that. Stick with the video. You guys can look in the description for a list of trees that we've discovered do well here, so that you guys can look for those when starting your garden or orchard or homestead like us. All right, we'll get into the video now. Woo! So the first thing I gotta tell you is you need to ignore the name of the fruit trees that you're buying. So right behind me, there's a row of really beautiful Bradford pears. Now you might say, oh, Bradford pears, I wanna get one. That's great. They're gonna produce pears for me. On top of being this really beautiful white flowering tree. Unfortunately, they produce these tiny little fruits that really only the birds can get and spread, and they actually are a pretty invasive tree because of that one feature. So don't let the name deceive you. There's also a bunch of non-fruiting cherry trees. They look really pretty. They have pink cherry blossoms, but they won't actually give you fruit. So you need to get kinds that are fruiting, sweet and tart cherries that will work in this area. The next thing that you really have to consider is, what is the ultimate goal? Are you trying to get fruit production out of this, or are you trying to get flowers? If all you want is flowers, then these beautiful trees are right up your alley. The next thing that you need to know is, will they actually fruit in my area? Where I'm from, I moved from the Phoenix area, and we had bonanza peaches. They were a miniature dwarf peach that grew these awesome peaches, and pound for pound for the tree, you got a ton of fruit off of this little tree. I noticed here in East Tennessee they actually sell bonanza peaches, but they don't even have like the fruit label underneath them. They actually label them as ornamental. The reason for this is, with the cold cycles we get here, they're a very early flowering tree, and you'll never end up getting fruit because the flowers are almost always killed off. So that leads us to our next step, and we're gonna actually take you back to the homestead, away from my neighbor's beautiful Bradford pears, to get into a little more detail on that. All right, everybody, we're back on the homestead. Actually, today's gonna be a tree planting day for me. Just happened to coincide with making this video, so no coincidences here. But in this video, we're gonna be talking at the very beginning on what you can do right off the bat that isn't gonna take a lot of knowledge and work to get a successfully fruiting fruit tree, and that step is by planting native trees. So let's talk about some of the native trees and bushes that you can get fruit off of with minimal to no effort whatsoever. Let me show you. All right, so the first tree that's gonna be on my list of natives that I recommend is gonna be the persimmon tree. One, they're a little bit more common, easier to find. They carry them just in Home Depot and definitely the box stores. You just go in and you'll see a very small American persimmon tree. These trees are awesome. This giant one that you see towering above me right here wasn't even planted. This thing just grew on its own from seeds from other persimmon trees around. The only drawback to the persimmon tree is, in most cases, they will need a male persimmon tree in order to get fruit. However, if you live in the country at all, chances are you've got those trees already on your property, and you even have a better chance of having male trees. So that's the first one. The next one I'm going to show you is the pawpaw. Let me show you that. All right, so the next one on my list is the pawpaw. You see this little guy right here? So the pawpaw tree, also like the persimmon tree, are native to this area. They didn't need to be introduced and cultivated and then moved to another area. They've always been here, and you'll notice on both of them that they don't have any leaves or flowers, and it's March 13th today, and they don't even have any sign that they're even alive right now. While some of the other trees that we've introduced into this area are showing signs of life. They've flowered, and some of them have even passed the flowering stage and now have leaves on them. So that brings us to one of the biggest reasons on why you're not getting fruit from your fruit trees. Actually, I'm going to say that's the number one reason, is because the flowers come too early. So let's go talk about that over by one of my other trees. All right, so the fruit tree we're looking at right here is a black satin pluot, which a pluot is a interspecific fruit tree. It's a mix between a plum and an apricot, with the majority of its parentage being the plum. But you'll see something on this tree that you didn't see on the other two, and that's that it's got leaves already. Those leaves mean that it's already flowered, it's already gone through its reproductive cycle, and you notice there's no little buds of fruit on this tree. Unfortunately, the last frost we had killed those flowers, and that's a big issue that we have out here. It's that we introduced a bunch of non-native trees, one, probably because they taste delicious, but we expected them to act the same way our native trees are, where they're not fooled by the fall springs, and they start leafing, they start flowering. When those flowers come, the tree looks so beautiful. You guys are probably very impressed with your trees at that time. Look, I've got this apple tree full of beautiful white blossoms. Look at that cherry tree with these pink and white blossoms everywhere. It's gorgeous. But if the goal is to get fruit, every time one of those late frosts comes, you're gonna lose that fruit. So that's a big deal, and that's a problem that we have a lot of issues with here in East Tennessee. How can we prevent this is the question that everybody's asking, myself included. So the number one way to prevent this issue of getting trees that are leafing out and budding before the last frost, which is supposed to be April 11th, guys, so we still have a whole other month. How we do that is we look for trees that bloom later. They don't wake up so easy. They have a little bit of a resistance to just wake up the second it starts getting warm out. The second we have a couple nice 70-degree days, it's not time to wake up, because they know better, just like our native fruit trees. So let me show you what we should be looking at when we're purchasing some fruit trees. All right, guys, as you can see behind me, this actually is kind of similar to what you'd see when you walked into a big box store. I'll show some of that in the background. What you see is you got a variety of trees. Some of them have leaves, like this little pomegranate, which is kind of an experiment, by the way, that I picked up in Florida. So that one doesn't really count for this video, but you'll see stuff that has leaves like this that's way past its flowering cycle. And if you get a frost, you will lose everything. So the later you can go seeing them without any leaves or flowers, the better chance that they're gonna have a later wake up period. So if you guys take a look at this cherry right here, this cherry, if I'm getting it in focus, this cherry doesn't have any leaves blooming on it. Zero. Doesn't have any signs of flowers. Zero. So to me, that's the kind of tree that you go in and look for. It goes against what we naturally want to do. We naturally want to walk in, we see the one that's got the pretty flowers we like. Oh, that one's got nice strong leaves. That one looks really good. You don't really go in and go, I want that dead one right there. That dead one looks great, because these trees are deciduous. They lose their leaves. You think if it doesn't have leaves, it's not healthy. But if it doesn't have leaves, it's probably going to give you a much better chance of producing fruit in the long run. So how do you tell if your tree's still healthy? All right, so I've got this cherry tree that I just showed you with no leaves on it, and I want to know, is this tree in good shape? I'm going to do what's called a scratch test. I'm going to scratch it, and you guys see it's green underneath. That means that this tree is still healthy, and I'm confident I'm not buying something that's dead. It's just in the dormant stage. So that is exactly what you need to look for. The other thing is, the internet's your friend. If you see something that says early bloomer, when you Google it, it's probably not a good one for us here, because we do have these fall springs almost every year. You will lose fruit trees. I'm really excited that I made a post last week on a few of the Facebook groups about what video I'm making right now, and basically asking, you know, what fruit trees have you guys had success with, what have failed. I probably got a dozen people following just because they don't even know what they can grow here either. They've had a bunch of limited success, and I've gotten some really good feedback. So what I'm going to be doing in this video is I'm going to be putting down in the description, because I can constantly update the description of fruit trees that people have and how often they fruit. Like, do they fruit every year? Do they survive most of the late frost, but every now and then one gets them and they get fruit every like 3 or 4 years, or the worst case scenario ones where you might not get them at all, or you might get them like every 10 years. So we're going to get some data down there for you so you guys can have something to choose from. But that's one of the biggest problems we have, is that late frost killing off those flowers. So we're going to go to some other steps on why we might not be getting fruit trees as well. All right, so another common problem people have when picking out their fruit trees is not only are the fruit trees probably going to struggle with our late frosts, but some of them actually require another fruit tree to pollinate them. Now, when you buy this, so like this is the Lapkin's cherry, and if you look on the back, it actually gives you a description of the plant. Well, on one of the last lines it says does not require a pollinator. So this tree can probably make it without one, and if you're only going to have one tree, you really need to look for that. If you have multiple trees, you're probably not even needing to look for it, because chances are, if they're around the same family, they're gonna bloom at a similar time and give you fruit. But that's a big one that sometimes people may not even realize, is they buy one tree of that variety and it never has another one to pollinate it. Now, if you buy 2 Lapkin's cherries and you put them, it's the same as having one, because they are essentially clones of each other. And so it's like just another branch pollinating another branch. You're not going to get any cherries. So you've got to make sure that you get a little bit of a variety. The other part with pollinating is they've got to be able to flower around the same time. So if you get one that blooms real early and another one that blooms later, they could not coincide with their blooming cycle. So a lot of times, if it is a pollinator is required, it'll actually put on the description what other fruit trees are good at pollinating them, and you can find one that's close or similar. But like apples can pollinate apples, crab apples can pollinate apples, you know, peaches, plums, cherries, pluots, apricots, apriums, plurries. There's all these new fun ones. They can almost all pollinate each other if they bloom at the same time, because they're close enough in relation to each other. So cross-pollinating, it's very important. Even if it is a tree that can pollinate itself, it'll always get better yields if it cross-pollinates either. So just keep that in mind if you do have the room for more trees. All right, we're gonna go to the next fun why I'm not getting fruit trees. All right, as you can see behind me, I've got some pretty large cedar trees. Now, cedar trees have some negative effects on our fruit trees here. So they create cedar apple rust, or just called cedar rust for short. Actually, it's a fungus that feeds between 2 different organisms, the cedar tree and an apple tree, as well as some of our other fruit trees we're trying to grow. And it causes the fruit tree to get sick, and it won't produce fruit when they're sick. It also has another byproduct that is somewhat debatable, so I'm not saying the jury's completely out on it, but it actually repels honeybees and other pollinators. They don't like the smell of the cedar. So that being said, cedar trees near your fruit trees is a problem. But what if you're like me and you've got cedar trees in every direction? There's no way, unless I just deforest my entire 51 acres, am I going to be able to get all the cedar trees to stop hurting my fruit trees. There is some fungal spray that you can get. There are some steps you can take if you start to see the little pockets of fungus growing on the cedar trees. You don't want them to spore out. There are some steps you can take, but mainly if you just plant them not out in the open, I'm sorry, you plant them out in the open, you don't plant them and just butt them up next to one of these cedar trees. You should be in decent shape with a little bit of management. You should be fine. Some other problems that we have is we have nematodes in the ground. Nematodes can be good, they can be bad. They can actually, you know, steal nutrients from your plants. They can eat and feed on them. You don't want to deal with nematodes that are going to be a pest. There are some fruit trees that are grafted onto a nematode resistant rootstock or cedar rust resistant rootstock. And what this means, don't let grafting scare you, but what they do is they take roots from a tree that does well in an area and they graft a variety that tastes good onto it, creating one tree. One doesn't hurt the other. In fact, when you do that, they can both live and benefit from the care that you're going to give the tree, because it's now giving you valuable fruit. Will benefit that rootstock that probably didn't produce good fruit and wasn't going to get that care, and then the top portion will get the benefits that rootstock gave it. It's a little bit more difficult out here in East Tennessee to find out what rootstocks are going on your trees. Back home, we used to have tags that had your tree, and then below they'd have another tag that said what rootstock it was, so you can kind of experiment. I think with my cherry tree failure, I tried on Mazard rootstock and that didn't work, and I was told by somebody to try some plum rootstock or some other rootstock, and I've heard people having success with it. So we just got to figure out here what kind of rootstocks do the best. For apples, there's a lot of good information at the UT Extension office about what types of rootstocks do well, and you can even order the rootstocks and try it that way like I did last year. I just didn't water them and they died. Anyway, so that's the next thing we've got to put into our bucket of concerns, is how susceptible they are to disease. All right, so the last reason you might not be getting fruit off of your fruit trees is maybe those fruit trees aren't in the right climate. Now you can look at the back of almost every tag for a fruit tree and it'll give you a description on what their hardiness is. This one says that it's hardy down to 29 degrees Celsius, 20 degrees Fahrenheit. So this one is well within the range, because we're in zone 7A and we can survive down to 0 degrees. Basically, that's 7A is down there. So this gives us quite a big boost on what can live here. You might have something like my fig trees behind me, which really 7B is kind of the limit for them to be very productive and fruitful. I mean, you can definitely do a few things to keep them going in 7A, no problem, even 6B. But these things take damage at 0 degrees. They take serious damage really about 10 degrees. And if you got down to 0 like we did this year, they took some serious damage. I'm actually hoping that they even survive at all. But if you look at what your plants are capable of, try to get it so that there's a little bit of a buffer there. Like if you see, oh, it's good either down to a certain temperature or it's good down to 7A, that means that 7A is the limit for that tree. It's not the exception, it's the limit for that tree. So if you're always pushing it on the limit, then it might struggle every winter and then take a long time in the summer to bounce back. So I would try to get one, if you're in zone 7A like I am, I would say maybe 6B is the lowest I'd look for, unless I'm really wanting to experiment with it. All right, so I mentioned Facebook asking some questions, and I can't emphasize enough how important it is to seek out information, especially locally. You've got a lot of people that have the same options for fruit trees that you're seeing. A lot of people have planted that plum hybrid that I planted and probably would have been able to tell me that, yeah, it's too early of a flower, you're never going to get fruit off of that. But ask around, ask Facebook, ask friends, ask neighbors. You see a fruit tree, you know, talk to your neighbor about it. If you find one that works and has been working, get the name of it, put it in the list, and I'll put it in the description, okay? So I'm excited to be able to get this information and collect it. About a year ago, when we moved here, I came across Shale Creek Nursery on one of the Facebook groups, and he had posted something like, hey, here's another picture of a plum tree that's flowering here early in February. I'll never see fruit off of it. But I started messaging him and I've learned a lot. He's given me some good varieties. Basically told me that Japanese plums will never fruit here. They're all way too early, but to start looking at European varieties. And that's what he's doing. So he has a nursery, he has a greenhouse. He's trying to get some fruit trees that he knows will actually survive and fruit for us here in this area, which is what we all want. Nobody wants a stick in the ground that will never give us what we need. And you know, there's a lot of flowering fruit trees. We don't need more varieties of that. If that's all we want our fruit trees for is the flowers, then I think we're missing an opportunity there as well. So hopefully this helps. Remember, grow your own food. It's the best food for you. Try to do everything you can to be self-sufficient. You never know where this world's going. And we'll catch you on our next video. Do subscribe, do like, and we'll see you around. Thanks, bye.